Hello, BookTube. I wanted to make a quick surprise video wrapping up our read-along of The Cruel Sea by Nicholas Montserrat. We have only the last two chapters to go, and together they make barely a fraction of any one chapter that we've read so far. So I thought I would just wrap it up in midweek so that I can jump into June with a whole bunch of new reading projects and a whole bunch of new things to do without wrapping up this, tagging along for the beginning of the month. We only have a little bit left to go because, as we are told right away in the two chapters that are remaining here, things have changed. Very much so. Now, we've already seen change in this story. We're introduced to Commander Erickson and his sub-lieutenant Lockhart and a few other characters that are prominent on a ramshackle little corvette, a anti-sub vessel called the Compass Rose. And we follow the Compass Rose as she gets her sea bearings, as she becomes accustomed to the depravities of the open ocean and also to the hunting of German U-boats. There's some tense moments, some horrifying moments, some bonding moments, and then the Compass Rose is sunk by a U-boat. Goes down in a minute. And most of that cast dies. Our central characters, Erickson and Lockhart, don't die by random chance. And when they are picked up and saved on the open ocean, which, keep in mind, is not a given at all, they themselves are coming across plenty of dead people on the ocean that were waited in vain for their rescue. When they are rescued and brought back and the news of what happened to the Compass Rose spreads, Erickson is promoted and given command of a frigate named the Saltash. And as a special favor, he asked Lockhart if Lockhart would come on as his second-in-command, even though Lockhart, with a recommendation from Erickson, could probably have merited a command of his own. So a situation that will be very familiar to, for instance, you Star Trek fans, since that happens not only with Kirk and Spock, but also with Picard and Riker. And the Saltash has adventures of its own, but the war is changing. The hardscrabble days of corvettes not even knowing where the enemy was and barely having any ability to thwart them, much less, or to detect them, much less thwart them, those days are over. There are more ships at sea, there's better equipment, and America has joined the war. So it makes sense to me, in a pragmatic way, just as from a writer's point of view, it makes sense to me that Montserrat would end the book this way. He knows perfectly well that there isn't any drama to be leaked in any realistic way from the events that his book would have to cover at the end of the Saltash's story. He knows there isn't the drama there. He does his best to level that out a bit by introducing another character, a woman named Julie Hallam, who is a Wren. She's in the detached military service for the UK, and she and Lockhart fall in love. Lockhart is cynical and morally and personally adrift, but he's thoroughly decent, and we get the sense that Julie is often adrift in the same way. They find each other and find that they love each other. So that we get a lot of that in the chapter that we just finished. We get a lot of that. And I mentioned at the time that I don't think Montserrat does it as well. His writing is a little cheesier in that kind of a civilian crowd than it is when he's dealing with things military. But we get its aftermath in these two final chapters. And the heartbreak is that Montserrat is not unrealistic about how that fallout will happen. That fallout will happen through mail. It will happen through letters. It won't be that these two characters are frequently meeting each other at all. It'll be that they're writing to each other. Julie writes a letter to Lockhart, for instance, informing him that she is having a baby, that they are having a baby, and that when the war allows, or when their schedules or their leaves allow, they will have to get married. It's a quiet little bombshell for Lockhart. It's a change in his life. It's not unwelcome as a change, but it's a significant change in his life. He can no longer be feckless. He can no longer even pretend to be feckless. The ship is ordered to repair and refit, but not in England. The repair and refit stations in England are too crowded. The ship is ordered to America, to the Navy shipyards in New York. for refit, redesign, all that sort of stuff. And Lockhart gets another letter. He gets a letter from a colleague of Julie's, writing him saying, best wishes. Hope you make it, back for the holidays. We're all thinking of you. And oh, by the way, isn't it a terrible shame about Julie that her ship went down in a storm with all hands, no survivors. We think here in the office that you knew her. We think you knew her. Isn't that a shame? Montserrat is really good. When he's good, he's really good. That hits you like a freight train. It is 10 times more powerful than it would be if he had written a scene where Lockhart is running down a cave, bursting through operating doors or whatever, or going to a telegraph office. Instead, he hears about it from someone who doesn't even know that they kept their relationship largely clandestine. This person doesn't even know that they were in love, much less that she was pregnant. He imagines it. Lockhart imagines what that final night, those final moments, that final dark water, mud on her face and in her mouth, the baby under her breast. He imagines what that would be like just once, because he can't help himself, because, as we've seen in this book, he's extremely familiar with drowning as a method of death. He can't not imagine it. But then he tries not to think about it. He tries to abstract himself from, just put it into a pocket of reality that doesn't affect him. He is still at work. He's still at his job. But the job has changed. The minute Saltash comes out of her refit and leaves New York and rejoins the British war effort, they can all feel it right away. And they're not the only ones. Montserrat himself also knows this. And he's canny enough as a writer to put this realization in the mouth of a character. He doesn't want you, the reader, to be just reading from page to page saying, is it just me, or is there no drama left in this book? He's continuing to write it. He knows where he wants his story to end, and he is choosing to bring it to this point. So he actually has someone say it. If I were writing the story of this contest, this is where the book would tail off, because we've reached the moment when nothing happens. We're just winning the war, and that's all there is to say. Yes, yes, indeed. We have the human drama of Julie Hallam. First, her incredible, happy announcement that she's pregnant, and then a random impersonal letter. Oh, isn't it a shame that she was lost? And we just have to feel for Lockhart the whole time. The interval when Saltash is undergoing refit and repair in New York, in the Brooklyn Navy Yards, does occasion... It allows Montserrat to give us a little bit of lighthearted stuff. Erickson sternly warns his crew that they are not to bring disgrace on the British Navy uniform. That they will not do that. And they don't. But they have a lot of encounters with Yankees. And Montserrat, he goes into those for all they're worth in terms of comedy. The scenes are much faster. They are much tighter controlled by and large. And there's only one part that's dramatic. There's only one part of that American interlude that isn't done at least partly for laughs. And I want to read you the whole thing of it. It's Lockhart speaking. He's talking about America. And America in the war. I wonder what, and those of you who will get this far, I wonder what you'll make of it. The trouble with these people, said Lockhart, referring to Americans, is that you can't help liking them even though you know you oughtn't to. Do you remember what it was like back in the middle 30s? They lectured us for years on end about stopping Mussolini, stopping Franco, stopping Hitler. It was a pretty safe lecture to give 3,000 miles away across the Atlantic. When war did break out, they waited over 2 years before they came into it. Waited while we were Dunkirked and bombed to hell and lost nearly 2,000 ships and Christ knows how many men. While we all bankrupted ourselves, while we gave them almost all our overseas investments to buy arms, while we signed away British possessions like Bermuda and Antigua in exchange for 50 destroyers that were never out of repair dock. Then they did decide to come in themselves. With a rush? Like hell. They came in because they were attacked by the Japanese and for no other reason. If it weren't for that attack, we'd still be waiting, and so would Hitler. If ever there's another war, I shall stay out of it for at least 2.5 years. In the meantime, I'd send plenty of instructions on being brave and standing firm, and I might start an organization called Bundles for Both Sides. It would depend on how nice people were to me. But when this one is over, the thing to be will be an American. They'll be running the world because we'll be broke and exhausted. They'll be in charge of everything. These charming dunderhead children who can't see around the very first corner of history. These products of a crapulous chauvinism. I don't want to tacitly endorse the idea of dunderhead children, but there are elements of that peroration that are correct. Definitely, that are correct. That kind of attitude doesn't take into account the political resistance that Franklin Roosevelt was facing. But there are elements of that reaction that are right. I liked reading it. And I would have probably liked to read Political Ruminations by Nicholas Montserrat. For all I know, he wrote them and they've never been collected into a book. It's still odd for it to be here. It doesn't read like Lockhart, either at any other point in the book or especially now, at this point in the book. It seems like the author introducing an editorial of his own, which he does a couple of times in the book, but they're mostly editorials about the valor of fighting men. This is politics. International relations, and it stuck out a little to me. But that's all that I have to comment on. I think the most dramatic part of these last 2 chapters, aside from the offstage pregnancy and offstage death of Julie, which is pretty devastating, it's handled perfectly. I think for my mind, this time around, this read along anyway, my most dramatic scene this time around is when word is given that the German High Command has surrendered. And German U-boats have been ordered to surface wherever they are. No maneuvering. Surface where you are and run the black flag of surrender. When Erickson and the Saltash are told this, they're told, be prepared for any individual action, meaning a captain who doesn't want to go quietly, in your own immediate area. And Erickson somewhat half facetiously calls this a libel. There cannot possibly be subs in our immediate area. That's what we're here for, is to make sure that's not true. And yet, when those subs all get their surface immediately order, a couple of them surface right where Erickson is. They surface right where he is. They just had no idea they were there. They surface all over the world, all over the ocean. And give up. I thought that was a marvelously done sequence. Erickson knows that the war is functionally over, but he doesn't feel like the German commanders of these ships he's been fighting and hunting for years have paid sufficiently. He doesn't feel like they've paid sufficiently. Almost wants to fight with one of them. The Germans, the Nazis involved, all know that discretion is a better part of valor. They surrender. No tricks. No final stands, no nothing. And that brings us to the end of the book. The Saltash safely in harbor. Montserrat tells us that they can hear, just beyond the breakers, the cruel sea roaring out there on the open lanes, wanting to get at them, but it can't. And we might also note that the cruelest thing in this book, I think, by far, is that offstage death of Julie Hallam. And it's not the enemy that does it, it's the sea. I think I love the subdominant low note ending to this book. I think it works perfectly. And that brings us to the end of our read along of this book. I of course want to know, those of you who are reading along, a lot of you are emailing me, so this will be mainly for future viewers who watch this read along and maybe want to get in touch with me. A lot of you have been emailing me about what you think of this. I am very pleased to report that there have been no naysays. Which is great. And unlike some other booktube channels where naysaying is not allowed, I know that if people weren't enjoying this, I would hear about it. We can disagree with each other and still stay friends. So I would have heard about it. I think that a lot of people are really loving this thing. And a couple of people who've been emailing me with weekly updates of their reading of this book have been expressing their gratitude at the prompt to read it because they would have consigned it to, oh, it's one of my granddad's books, or it's in my granddad's library. What could possibly be in that library that would be of interest to me? So that's been wonderful, and I want to know how you feel when you're at the end of this thing. But I also want to know, now that we're wrapping this up, what you make of these final 2 chapters. They are very down tempo. They're characters openly reflecting on the fact that the story is effectively over. The final line of the book, the final scene of the book, is Erickson and Lockhart just standing together, alone, and Erickson saying, "I'm really tired." It doesn't get more low-key than that as the ending to an action-filled book, a tense World War II novel. So I'd love to know what you think about that ending, but irregardless of what you think of that ending, I want to thank you all for coming along with me on this read along. It was just so much fun. I enjoyed it so much. And I have a bunch of read along plans and schemes in the works, so I'll be either announcing some of those today or tomorrow. But we're done with the Cruel Sea now, so the dock is largely clear. So I'll wrap this up, and thank you all again. I'll try to remember or get someone to make a playlist of these videos. No promises, but I'll see you next time. Thank you.